So, who's Amplify Change? We are a not-for-profit, independent organisation who have a grant-making organisation that supports advocacy to make sure that there are sexual and reproductive rights, access to sexual and reproductive health and rights for all, with a particular focus on those least able to attain and enjoy their sexual reproductive health and rights, including women, girls, people living with disabilities, young people, LGBTI, and vulnerable and marginalised groups, such as people living with HIV, and make that a reality for them. Most recently, Amplify Change registered as an independent organisation, and we gave out our first grants as this independent organisation back in November 2020. We've had this opportunity after being in existence for 6 years and having supported around 900 grants to civil society organisations. We've had an opportunity recently to reflect, and part of that reflection has been to incorporate changes and innovations, many of which have come from the grantees that we've supported along the way. And the partnership grant is one of those innovations. Okay. So I wanted just to take a moment to consider, to recap over the guiding values that drive Amplify Change, and this is very much the values that apply to this grant. So we try, as a fund, we try to be responsive, accessible, supportive, open, demand-led, and transparent. We also ask these types of qualities in the organisations that are seeking funding from us as well. With these values in mind, Amplified Change seeks to support advocacy on issues and inequalities around sexual reproductive health and rights. Our theory of change gives an insight into how positive change can happen. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Imeshe to take us through the theory of change.
Thank you, Liz, and welcome everyone. As Liz mentioned, we have a theory of change as Amplified Change. If you have partnered with us in the past, this may look familiar because our vision and our main goal has not changed. It is the full attainment of Srhr for all, including women and girls, youth, vulnerable and marginalized groups. We believe at Amplified Change that in order to achieve this overall vision, we need to achieve change in 5 thematic areas, which you can see on the screen in the impact section of the theory of change. And these 5 areas are eliminating all forms of gender-based violence, access to safe and legal abortion and post-abortion care for all, eliminating stigma and discrimination on grounds of gender and sexual orientation, access to comprehensive sexuality education and information, as well as services for young people, and access to Srhr services that are rights-based, cultural appropriate, and gender sensitive. So I'm just mentioning these impact thematic areas because you may have seen in the application form, if you have already started one, that we are asking each applicant to indicate which Amplified Change thematic areas their proposed project correspond to. And so this is what that refers to. We do not expect all projects, of course, to correspond to all of our thematic themes. Most likely it will be just 1 or 2 of our themes, but we would like to see how the proposed projects correspond to our theory of change. You may also see in our theory of change that we realize that in order to be able to achieve change in all these areas, we would like to support projects with different types of outcomes. So we find it really important to support projects that aim to build stronger and more inclusive movements for Srhr. We also support projects that aim to increase individual awareness of Srhr as human rights, that aim to improve access to SRHR resources, information, and services. We also support projects that aim to transform social norms and also projects that focus on changing policies and laws. We support civil society organizations through grants, but also through organizational strengthening and knowledge for advocacy support. And as you can see at the bottom of this slide, we have 4 different grant types, from opportunity grants, which is our smallest in terms of budget size grant type, to partnership grant, which is our largest grant type. And this was just a brief introduction to our theory of change. It is available on our website and also in our strategy document. So I really encourage you to, if you have time after the webinar, to take a closer look. But for now, I think we would just go on and talk more in detail about the partnership grants. So partnership grants are a new type of grant, and this is our very first call for this type of grant. The aim and purpose behind these partnership grants is to support already established civil society organizations from Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia to strengthen civil society movements and advocacy for SRHR. We also hope that with the successful partnership grant holders, Amplify Change can create new partnerships. And these partnerships will be designed and built together with the successful partnership grant holders. So in the application form, for example, you will find a question about what type of partnership you would like to establish with Amplify Change. In terms of what the partnership grants can focus on and be used for, so the idea behind these partnership grants is that the successful partnership grant holders will support smaller grassroots civil society organization within their SRHR movements through several ways. It is an essential and very important part of all partnership grants that they should provide advocacy grants to smaller grassroots civil society organizations. And we refer to this as on granting in some of the documents. So if you see on granting in the guidance or in the application form, this is what it refers to. But we also would like to see partnership grant holders support smaller grassroots organizations within their SRHR movement with organizational strengthening, and potentially also provide knowledge for advocacy support. If a partnership grant holder feels that their organizations themselves would benefit from additional strengthening, for example, to strengthen their grant making capacity, that is also possible, an optional part of a partnership grant. A partnership grant has a minimum time period of 2 years and a maximum time period of 3 years. So in the application, we ask all applicants to indicate how many months they are planning to apply for. So please make sure that it's between 2 and 3 years. And in terms of the budgets that applicants can apply for, it ranges from £200,000 to £1.5 million over up to 3 years. We also mentioned in the guidance that our hope is that with time we can extend the grants to up to 5 years and potentially up to a maximum of £2.5 million. But just would like to add here that these are potential plans. It depends on availability of funding and also how the grants are progressing. So for the time being, in the current application phase, we would like applicants to apply for up to 3 years of funding and up to £1.5 million. So with that, I think I hand back the mic to Liz, who is going to talk about the eligibility criteria.
So those who have already started applications will be able to see that there were several eligibility criteria, and I see there's already questions coming up in the chat around this. We're looking to support established civil society organisations registered in an eligible country. That's a ODA recipient country. There is a list very clearly on the website about which countries are eligible to apply under this partnership grant. We're looking for organisations that are working on one of the 5 Amplified Change priority themes, which Emeshe went through from our theory of change. It can be more than one, as she mentioned. We're looking for a track record and capability to provide support to the Srhr movement. This is key. It doesn't necessarily have to be national, but it could be national. It could also be regional. It could be more local as well, but really connected and linked into the movement and really to be a significant part of that. The project must be implemented in those eligible countries. So we're looking for registration in an eligible country and implementation in an eligible country. Previous or current experience with on-granting to smaller civil society organisations within the Srhr movement, it would be ideal, but it isn't a requirement, and we certainly consider the ability to build up that facility within an organisation who's looking strategically to move into a grant-making role. International and non-government organisations based in or originating from the Global North are not eligible to lead a partnership grant application. They could, however, contribute on the ground and be a downstream partner or partner within the consortium that applies for the partnership grant. We're asking that organisations only submit one application as a lead organisation in this partnership round. Since we are anticipating a fairly high demand, it's possible for an organisation that is awarded a partnership grant as a lead to also be an implementing partner in another partnership grant, for example. And by applying for the partnership grant, this doesn't preclude you from applying for other opportunities that may be coming from Amplify Change in the near future. So the next slide, please. The annual value of the partnership grant cannot exceed 50% of the organisation's average annual expenditure over the past 3 years. So we're looking to see that your average annual expenditure, so the amount that you've been spending over the past 3 years, is not greater than 50% of the amount that you're going to be applying for this partnership grant. As an example, if an applicant applies for £300,000 over 3 years, the annual value of the grant is £100,000. Therefore, in this case, the average annual expenditure of the applicant organisation must be £200,000 or more. Okay, the next slide will give an outline of the process and how we're anticipating it will happen. The applicants, we're asking applicants to submit their concept notes by May the 6th, and the close is at 5 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time. The second step is a review of those concept notes by Amplify Change's independent technical review panel. That will happen throughout May. Those that get through that stage will be invited to submit a full application in June, and again that will be reviewed by the technical review panel, who will make recommendations to the Amplify Change board, and then you'll be informed towards the end of the year when there will be a due diligence and pre-contracting phase. So we would anticipate the grants probably starting in early 2022. Thank you. So the next phase of the presentation is to go to some frequently asked questions. And again, I've included the email address there for any specific inquiries relating to your organisation or particular context. So the next slide, we look at the frequently asked questions. And what does it mean to be an applicant originating from the Global South? We're looking to strengthen civil society organisations in the Global South. So this partnership around the lead applicant must be Sub-Saharan, African or South Asian, and have its own ability to define a strategy, raise funds, set performance targets and other objectives. They should be able to define their own brand identity and have a governance structure fully independent of the Global North-based headquarters or support office. AmplifyChange encourages and recognises the interconnectedness of civil society across the world. However, we are focused on ensuring that partnership grants are led by southern-based organisations emerging from and rooted in their own communities to advance sexual, reproductive health and rights. These groups have fewer opportunities for funding in general in the global development financing architecture, which limits their opportunities to lead advocacy agendas. International NGOs may apply as partners within a partnership grant led by a southern-based organisation. Next question, is it possible for a project to be implemented in more than one country? There are no limits in terms of the number of implementation countries. Applicants can propose to implement their project in any number of eligible countries. What organisation types can apply? AmplifyChange will consider applications for civil society based in, and we recognise the scope of civil society and the wide range of organisations, actors and coalitions it encompasses. Civil society can include community groups, youth groups, non-government organisations, indigenous groups, charitable organisations, faith-based organisations, research institutes, social enterprise groups, public and private partnerships, communications and media groups, and professional associations. All, of course, must meet the eligibility criteria. The lead organisation must meet the eligibility criteria. You can apply as a consortium, or you could also apply as an individual organisation. Those that don't have grant making experience are also welcome to apply, and we'd be very interested to hear about how you intend to move into this area and at what point you would hope to be making grants throughout the probable 3-year life of the project. We'd also like to hear about why you'd be well placed to do grant making in your context. Will AmplifyChange influence how we give grants and on what themes? AmplifyChange will be looking to see that your grant making fits with our theory of change. It can be as broad or as narrow as you like. We will be looking for an appropriate level of due diligence for the size of organisation, for the size of grant that you will be giving. We'd like to work in consortia. Can we still do that? It's possible to have downstream partners to work with on organisational strengthening, knowledge from advocacy work, etc., as well as having on-granting organisations. So what is the difference between on-grantees and downstream or implementing partners? As we define an implementing partner as a third party who carries out part of the project you are applying for under AmplifyChange, an on-grantee is defined as a recipient of a grant awarded by you following an application process, using funds granted by AmplifyChange to you, to that organisation. Okay. Well, that's the presentation that we have so far. I'm very happy and pleased to say that we've got lots of time for questions going forward. I think the way that we're going to organise this is that one of the team is going to read out the questions and we shall do our best to answer them. If in the event that we can't, we can follow up with you afterwards with a concrete reply. So
Thanks, Liz. I have a few questions from the chat box, mostly on topics that you haven't mentioned just in the previous slide. So, one participant is asking if an organization that has never received grants from AmplifyChange before, or sorry, never received grants before, would they be eligible to apply for a partnership grant?
Okay, so the question is really extends to whether or not the organisation is registered and indeed has received any funding at all, because they wouldn't meet the financial eligibility criteria of having 3 years of income potentially. So that may exclude them in the case of a partnership grant. However, there are other types of grant, like our opportunity grants, which would allow for this, have a more flexible approach to sort of new organisations.
Thanks, Liz. We also had the question about whether an organization needs to be registered in the country or countries where it plans to implement the project. Grant.
No, we're only asking that the organisation be registered in an eligible country. So whether or not you are implementing in that country or other countries effectively doesn't matter, although there are obviously questions about it would be good to hear the justification for why you're not working in the country where you would be registered.
Thank you. There was also just a clarification question about the budget, whether the maximum £1.5 million is for 3 years or for 1 year.
So we're that's right. 1.5 million is for 3 years. So it's an annual budget of £500,000. The range is 100,000 to 200,000 to 500,000.
Great. There's also a question of whether the on-grantees, so the smaller civil society organizations that the partnership grantees would support, have to be registered organizations, and whether there's a limit, like a minimum number of organizations a partnership grant holder would need to support.
So there's no limit in terms of the number. That's a very good question about the on-granting and the registration. It's going to vary from country to country. So as far as AmplifyChange is concerned, effectively the risk of the on-granting lies with the grant holding organisation. So it depends on whether you as the grant holder are prepared, what level of risk you're prepared to take, and how, and from our perspective, we would be looking to see the sort of due diligence you will be doing on the downstream partners. So the answer is yes, they can be unregistered organisations, but we would expect a level of due diligence from you, and just an understanding that you would be taking the risk of working with unregistered organisations.
Great, thank you, Liz. And there was also a question about what we mean by organizational strengthening support provided to smaller grassroots organizations by the partnership grant holder.
Yeah, that's also a good question. I think we're really interested in seeing these organisations grow and flourish and become part of a movement. So, well, oftentimes, in the sort of downstream partner model, organisations get funding for specific activities, go off and do their activities, and they're left with very little for sort of core costs and that kind of thing. Whereas this on-granting model gives the opportunity for those organisations to have some kind of contribution to their indirect costs, to their sort of organisational strengthening. And we'd be very keen for the lead organisation, but to be taking a role in providing things like financial management training or other elements that would enable those small grassroots organisations to be able to apply for funding in their own right, for example. So it's about, taking those organisations on a journey. Perhaps it is more about being better advocates or better speakers, or there's a whole range of activities that could be taken under that organisational remit. And I don't want to limit it. I've given a couple of examples, but I'm sure you'll have your own ideas about what's appropriate for that context. But so it's really some kind of sharing of knowledge from the sort of larger applicant organisation to the smaller civil society organisations, so that they can develop and grow.
Great, thank you. There were also a few questions, like very budget-specific questions of what type of expenses are allowed and what are not allowed. And I don't know if you. Yes.
I'm gonna say look at the financial guidance that's on the website for that. I think we do transaction-based accounting, so we will be looking at you be reporting on a transaction level. Obviously, for on granting, it's going to be a disbursement of a sum of cash to an organisation, but we would expect that organisation to be reporting to you in a similar way at a transaction level. So were we to be coming to audit the grant, we would expect to be able to have a solid paper trail right back down to the way that money is being spent by the grassroots organisation.
And also just wanted to add that at this stage, right, at the concept note stage, we are only asking for overall budget amount, and it's only at the full application stage when those applicants who are invited to submit a full application will need to submit a detailed budget, and then further guidance will be provided at that stage as well. So. Yes, there's also a question about how many grants can we support through this round of applications.
I mean, as you've seen, there's quite a big range of the purse is it covers quite a big range from 200,000 to 1.5 million. So it really depends on the size of the applications that we get. I mean, we've allowed for 5 grants at the top end of the budget, but there may be a bit of flexibility depending on the size of applications that we receive.
Great. There was also a question, can one organization apply for more than one grant? Yeah.
The answer to that is no. Where an organisation can only be a lead on one grant. They could be a downstream partner on other grants in addition to being a lead. But we're asking for application for organisations to just make one application.
And there were also a few questions about whether already at concept note stage, applicants would need to identify which grassroots organizations they will be supporting. Were they successful?
So because of the nature of the on-granting element, that's not going to be possible, obviously, because we'd be expecting you you might choose to run a competitive funding round or make a selection in a different way, and we wouldn't expect you to have made that selection in advance. So for the on-granting, absolutely not. And there is some flexibility. I think even at the initial stage, we're not going to ask you to necessarily. There's scope to change consortium partners throughout the sort of application process and into the pre-contracting potentially. It would be good to get an indication of the sorts of organisations you'd be hoping to partner with. But if that's not possible, then it's not a deal breaker, I think.
There was also a few questions about the eligibility regarding the organizational annual expenditure and related to the budget that applicants can apply for. And there's a question of whether, if an applicant doesn't meet this requirement, whether they can partner with implementing partner and kind of combine their
we're looking for the leader organisation to meet that eligibility criteria. So I would say if you as an organisation don't meet that criteria, then it may be worth going along and finding an organisation that does, so that you can partner with them. We're not able to sort of group together different organisations' income. We are particularly looking for that level of I guess financial management to already be in place in the lead applicant organisation.
Yes, sorry, I'm just going through.
Whilst MSA is doing that, I would just say that we're really excited about this new grant and really, hopeful that there's lots of opportunities to be for the SRHR movement to be much more responsive in and of its own right within a country or regional context, and so we're really excited to read your applications and see what comes forward in this, and hope to have subsequent partnership rounds in the future as well. So even for those who feel like they're not in a position to move into grant making at the moment, it's hopefully there's sparking ideas around what future opportunities might look like.
Great. We also had a question about whether on-granting needs to be a mandatory part of a partnership grant.
Yeah, for a partnership grant, we are looking for on-granting. It's really about being enabled. I mean, well, Amplify Change was established to reach grassroots organisations and to do grassroots granting, and to a degree we have achieved that in the last 5 or 6 years and been very successful. You can see by the number of grants that we've made over that period of time compared to other donors, and the sort of proportion that is going to smaller organisations. So we view this partnership grant mechanism as a way of continuing to do that, as well as also building the capacity for grant making, even closer to those grantees. So so grant making is a component of this. There will be other opportunities to apply for different grant types where grant making isn't a requirement for those that don't want to go down that route. And it is we are going to be looking at, you are going to be taking on a very different role as a grant making organisation. We recognise that there is a different power dynamic and things. It's not for everybody. We're really looking for a solid commitment to that and from the applicant organisation.
Great. Thank you. There are a few questions about whether it's possible to apply offline and also whether there's an offline template for the concept note.
I would suggest please send an email to that email address that's on the screen now and ask about that. And please explain why you would like to do that. I'm sure we can work possibly with that, but I think we need to have a clear understanding of why you want to be applying offline, and if there's anything we can do to help you to apply online.
Mm-hmm. And yes, so there were a few questions about whether if an organization would like to focus on a specific theme, like for example, early and forced child marriage, do they need to can they submit application within that SRHR theme, or do they need to focus on all aspects of gender-based violence?
No, we're very happy to have quite specific projects. In many ways, it makes it easier. I think to think through to the grant making. Often is easier to have quite specific calls and working on specific areas in order to be able for that grant making to really kind of feed into a larger knowledge for advocacy or advocacy agenda that you might take forward, say at a national level. So if you're looking at grant making at grassroots level, you want to be able to, there needs to be some cohesion for that. For you to be gathering information from that grant making and taking it through into a sort of a broader advocacy, for example, a national advocacy agenda, for example, as an idea.
Thank you. There are a few questions around how, in the case of a successful application, if somebody applied with an implementing partner, whether the implementing partners would also receive funding directly from AmplifyChange, or whether it's a lead organization that receives funding.
Good question. AmplifyChange would be dispersing to the lead organisation. There may be, so that's the case, and then the lead organisation would disperse money to its downstream partners, and obviously through the on-granting grants.
Mm-hmm. Yes, there were a few questions about whether when somebody applies for partnership grants, would they still be eligible to apply for any other AmplifyChange grants?
Yes, you would. By having an application, you can see that the process is going to take a little while, so you'd be free to apply to any other funding rounds that open in the meantime. Yeah, and similarly, current grantees of AmplifyChange are also welcome to apply.
And just to confirm, there are just a few questions to confirm whether organizations have to partner with other organizations, or can they also just apply by themselves?
You can apply by yourselves. A single organisation can apply, and yeah, that's fine.
Great. And yes, and there are questions specifically from India.
Yeah.
About the specific circumstances of
I'm afraid this grant type doesn't really lend itself very well to the situation in India, where moving money from one organisation to another is not currently permitted. I think I personally can't particularly see a way around that at the moment in India. If you can, then I'm very happy to have a conversation or a chat about it, or you can apply, explaining how you might be able to work around it. But I think it may be better to wait for subsequent calls, different grant types from AmplifyChange that may be more conducive to just giving money to one organisation and with no movement on to other organisations. I'm sorry about that. We did try and tackle that idea, but it's we're committed to continue working in India and to funding organisations in India, but I'm afraid I'm not sure that this grant type is going to be very useful. I'm sorry about that, but yeah.
Yes. So there's also a question about whether partnership grant for a partnership, it is important to have a multi-country approach. Is it important?
It's not. I mean, no, it isn't. That's. I don't think that it's more to do with the quality of what you're hoping to achieve. I think, rather than where the grant is, how broad the grant is going. I would be surprised if you applied at the lower end for the lower end of the financial spectrum, if you applied for a multi-country grant. But if you're moving towards the higher end of the spectrum, then it may make perfect sense. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And there were also a few questions about, we indicate in the guidance that we will ask applicants to submit annual audited accounts for the organization, and also strategic plans. And just to clarify whether these are needed at concept note stage or full application stage.
I'd need to check that unless you know.
Oh yeah, I do. Sorry, yeah. So we only need those at full application stage. So at concept note stage, we just ask organizations to indicate their budget request, and also indicate their annual organizational expenditure amounts for the past 3 years. But we only ask those applicants who are invited to submit a full application to submit the audited documents and the organizational strategic plans, together with defining further indicators. So those would only happen at full application stage. So yeah, hopefully.
I expect that we would probably run another webinar like this for those that reach the full application stage. So there'll be an opportunity to ask questions again at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and then again, there's just, I think you mentioned this already, but there are quite a few questions about whether Southern-based organizations can have a global North-based implementing partner.
They can have a global North-based implementing partner, but we're just asking that the lead organization is a Southern-based organization.
Mm-hmm. Great. And there were also, this might be a bit tricky, but what we mean by Srhr movement.
Well, then that's a good question. It is a very good question. But how long have we got? I think Srhr affects everybody. We're looking, it's interconnected. There's a lot of intersectionality. We're not looking to be funding silos. We're looking at advocacy. We're not, I think that movement is changes and redefines, and there's different elements within that broader movement. So I think it's if you're looking at the early example of early child and forced marriage, then that's a movement within we would view that as a movement within the sexual reproductive health movement. Similarly, if you're looking at tackling issues around abortion, that's almost a movement within. So it's really about how you're working, intersectionally within the context that you're hoping to work, but also with like-minded partners. So we're looking to support a movement that's seeking to achieve change, because we understand that advocacy is not something that an individual organization will achieve, be that changing social norms or changing a policy and a law. So there's always this question that comes with advocacy around, is it attribution? Or can we attribute that change to your organization, or have you contributed towards that change? Most often, organizations are contributing towards a broader change, a change in society, a change in individuals, a change in policies and laws. So we're really looking for that interconnectedness, so that you're not just working in isolations, but you have that there's a similar project going on in a different area, or that you complement the work that's happening in the context that you're hoping to work in. So it's really about that sort of connectedness and being joined up and linking small organizations with bigger organizations and so on and so forth. I hope that goes some way to explaining what we would consider to be an SRHR movement. But it's a very broad term. But I think it's really what I'd be hoping to see is that you're that this grant is doing something towards creating or developing that movement, expanding that movement.
Great, thank you. There were two more questions. One was whether these responses will be available on the website, and then I can just quickly say that we are planning to put a frequently asked questions document on the website, and this will include all the questions that Liz mentioned in the presentation, and also the ones that are coming through the chat box now.
And also
then
from the Francophone webinar.
Yeah.
As well. Yeah.
From the webinar tomorrow. And Liz, there's one question about if an organization is not currently working in Srhr sector, are they eligible to apply for the grant?
Yes, you're eligible. I think we would be looking to see very carefully about what the intention is and why you're considering moving over into Srhr. I think really for a grant of this size, we would anticipate granting to organisations that are already part of that movement, that are already inserted in that the work in that country. So it's probably not a great place to be starting for a grant of this size. Again, I would recommend perhaps one of the smaller grants if you're looking at sort of moving into that into this sector, if you like.
Great. And then I think we have a few more minutes for a few more questions. There's one, apologies, I don't know if we touched upon this already, but what percentage of the grant should be for on-granting? I think we talked a little bit about the budget already.
We haven't specified that, and really we're interested to see what comes in the application forms. Where people's comfort levels are. I mean, and we haven't even specified that whether you need to be on granting in the first year, the second year, or the third year. There's really no. We recognise that for many organisations this may be a new thing, and you might like to take some time to get your systems in place and to be running a funding round and so on. So so there's no currently there's no criteria around that. There's no eligibility around that.
Great. Thank you. I think there is a question that we might have maybe addressed, but whether an organization can submit applications from more than one consortium. I think that might mean that either they are implementing partners in more than one application, or maybe a lead partner in one and implementing partners in others. Yeah.
Maybe then just to clarify that you can only apply as a applicant on one application. If you are then mentioned as a downstream partner in another organisation's application, that's fine, but that's the extent to which we would allow. You couldn't be leading on two applications.
There's also just an online form related question that I think quickly respond, because somebody noticed as a first part when organizations start applying, there are just a couple of questions, I think 8, which relate specifically to eligibility. Just to clarify, those are just the first set of questions, eligibility questions, and because only organizations who are actually eligible to apply will be able to proceed onto the main concept note form. So that's the first phase of the application form, and then if an organization is eligible to apply, then the concept note form opens up to a few more questions. Great. And then there's a question whether an organization, a lead organization that would have government or local government agencies as implementing partners could apply.
Sorry, can you?
Oh yeah, sorry. So if a lead organization, can the lead organization partner like as implementing partners with local government agencies?
I think
to
I need
implement.
to get back to you on that one.
Yeah. I think with that specific question, if you would not mind contacting us on the email address that is on the slide.
Yeah, I think
That would be great.
I think the likely question is no, but it would be interesting to know a little bit more about who your the sort of nature of that government institution would be, to be able to reply more definitively.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, there's a question about the amount, the annual organization expenditure amount. What currency should be indicated in the application form? Is we do ask those amounts to be in pounds.
Yeah, the grant will be
Mhm,
made in pounds, so we'd ask you
mhm,
to convert at a sort of reasonable exchange rate, take the day's exchange rate and convert that into pounds, please. And do follow the guidance around using dots and numbers and zeros and things, because it can be a bit confusing. So there's around that question, I think there's some quite strict guidance about how you present that number.
mm. Yes, I think there are a few questions about implementing partners as well, whether they need to have some sort of level of organizational expenditure amounts or any requirements for them. Yeah.
We're not asking for that at this stage, so no. I think we would expect them to be registered organisations, probably. Yeah, I think we would. So we're not going to be asking for that evidence at this point. And as I mentioned, there is the opportunity to discuss that with you as time goes on, as you move through the process.
And then there's also a question of if somebody currently has an AmplifyChange grant, can they apply for a partnership grant?
Yes, they can.
Yeah, great. Great. And then there's a question if an organization, I think it's quite a specific case, so I don't know if this we would need to discuss, but if they are registered in 2 countries, whether they can apply.
It would depend which countries they are and what the I think probably drop us an email about that with a bit more detail about the 2 registrations.
Yeah, so I think there are a few quite specific questions. So if they weren't included in this webinar, then just please just contact us on the email address on the screen, and then we can discuss in more detail or give advice. Okay. There were a few questions whether community-based organizations are eligible for to apply, and
if they meet the criteria, then yes, they are.
Great. I think we're slowly coming up to the end of our time. So I think this would be it in terms of the questions. If you are all happy with.
I think there's one there. I just
Sorry. Yeah.
that's okay. Around the split across a consortium, we're not dictating what that split is. So, for example, if you've got 3 organisations and you're applying for 1.5 million, it doesn't have to be a straight 500,000 for each of the 3 organisations. That's how you divide that up is up to you and what makes sense for the project. We generally tend to recognise, if one of those organisations is involved, for example, in grant making and things, and running the sort of consortium, if you like, then there's going to be a higher cost for that organisation potentially. So, but very happy to, as long as there's a logic and to the way that you're going to divide that up and the way that you arrange the budget, then then that's fine.
Great.
And just to say the minimum, again, that the minimum duration we're seeking applications for is 24 months. Yeah, so thanks everyone. I think that's probably all we've got now. We've gone right up to the hour, but perfectly kept to the hour. So I thank you all for your engagement and participating today, and of course your listening. Please, as we've said throughout, do get in touch if you have specific questions, and we wish you well in your planning and application if you decide to apply for this type of grant. Again, the webinar will be posted on our Amplify Changes YouTube channel in the coming days, perhaps next week. So we look forward to you. You can catch up then or share with colleagues.